So after my mate passed away, I purchased his home-built Sonerai. So I brought it home, put it together, and admired her for a while. She really was a beautiful plane. Now, this would be my first kind of high-performance plane that I would own. So it was time for our first startup. So after I thoroughly warmed up the engine, ended up taxiing out my runway, doing quite a few taxi runs. However, I would find out that this plane most likely was never going to fly in and out of my difficult strip. Now, my strip is quite difficult, pretty much one way in, one way out, and it's only 500 metres long, so I had no choice but to remove the wings and yet again pack her on the trailer and transport her. So I took her out to Goolwa and did my test flying or first flights down there. It's always a scary moment flying any craft that you're unfamiliar with, but this particular aircraft being designed around a Formula V, and knowing the history of these aircraft, yeah, it was quite a nervous experience. Taxiing out there, I just went all through the emergency procedures in my head, what would happen if the engine stopped at this point. Committed, open up the throttle. What I wasn't expecting was a lack of initial thrust. She didn't have that, pop that the aircraft I'd flown previously had. She's quite sluggish in her initial run-up. What I did notice straight away was how sensitive the controls were. Absolutely super sensitive, and I love that in my aircraft. So I rotated at around 70 knots and felt the climb, felt comfortable at around 80 knots. Now, generally I don't go by the airspeed indicator. I go by the feel of the stick, and I wish pretty much every pilot would do this. The stick tells you what the plane's doing, you can feel it in the stick. The stick's coming back, you're approaching the stall, it's simple. You can feel the mushiness of the stick. The airspeed indicator to me is just secondary, and I've flown enough planes without them just to know the feel of the plane. So anyway, I cruised around the circuit, and this seems fast. I didn't even open it up to its full cruise. I sat on 130 knots. Now, as I line up the runway, I planned on coming down to 60 knots, but the plane felt mushy, the stick felt mushy. When I approached basically 70 knots, I felt uncomfortable with the stick, so I chose 80 knots on the final, and I reckon my hands were quite sweaty. So basically I'm just feeling the stick, I'm not bothered about anything else but feeling the stick. You can see I tickle the throttle a little bit, and down she went, and absolutely beautiful. And I was quite stoked with the handling. The thing I was quite disappointed was not only the initial takeoff roll, but even the landing roll. It was massive. I used around 600 meters of the runway. So unfortunately with this plane I was unable to operate this plane out of my strip, so I had no other choice but to pass it on, and yeah, I ended up swapping it for the 1948 Piper Vagabond. So that's the end of the story for the Sonerai.